Okay, welcome to the Historic Preservation Commission. This is a special meeting, May 24th, 6 p.m., and we're having the evening in honor of Historic Preservation Month, and hopefully getting a few more attendees in person, which we have, thank you, and then hopefully on the computer or on the TV. So with that, let's do roll call.
Commissioner Morgan?
Here.
Commissioner Tufankian? Commissioner Vartanian?
Here.
Commissioner Vidor?
Here.
And Chairperson Shire.
Here. Item number 2 on the agenda. The agenda was posted on or before Tuesday on, I'm sorry, is that correct? We have the wrong date on here.
Yeah, we all do.
Yeah.
December
Okay, it was on
6th.
it was on or before sometime in May, I assume.
That was last Tuesday?
Okay, last Tuesday.
Tuesday, yeah.
Thank you. May 22nd?
No, May's
16.
15th or 16th.
Correction on the agenda. Let's start that over. The meeting agenda was posted on or before Tuesday, May 15th on the bulletin board outside of City Hall. Item number 3 is approval of the minutes. Are there any comments or revisions?
No.
No? Okay. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
Roll call?
Commissioner Morgan?
Yes.
Commissioner Tufankian?
Yes.
Commissioner Vartanian?
Yes.
Commissioner Vidor?
Yes.
And Chairperson Shire.
Yes. Okay, oral communications. At this time, I don't have any cards that are non-agenda topic items, so we'll just skip over that. Number 5, comments from commissioners. Do we have any?
I have an announcement to make. This is for anybody who's interested. On Thursday, June 14th, at the Central Library at 222 East Harvard, there's going to be a very interesting talk and book signing at 7 o'clock. The book we're going to hear a talk about is called Edward Weston, Marguerite Mather, and the Bohemians of Los Angeles. And it's a very, very fascinating account. I read it. It's a great book of the life of Edward Weston and his muse Marguerite Mather while they resided in their little studio in what used to be called Tropico but is now South Brand Boulevard in Glendale. There was a lot of interesting artistic activity in and around that area, and the author of the book, Beth Gates Warren, is going to tell us about it with pictures. So 7 o'clock, June 14th at the library, great book talk and book signing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, I would quickly like to thank our own Jay Platt for doing a webinar presentation for Historic Preservation Month through the California Preservation Foundation about historic preservation in the U.S., which I attended online, and I also found it very informative and very entertaining. You're quite a
Webinarian.
presenter, a webinarian. Yes. And I also quickly want to
Thank you.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you.
I wanted to quickly thank the Glendale Historical Society for partnering with the Historic Preservation Commission to do a workshop last Monday, I think, or Wednesday, where Jay Platt and our own Arlene Vidor presented. So that went very well. We had about 40 people there. And thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, next on the agenda is item number 6, 6A, proposed Rossmoyne Historic District. And this is a recommendation to City Council regarding the establishment of a historic district overlay zone. And at this time, I'd like to recuse myself and also Commissioner Vartanian as we reside in Rossmoyne, and ask for Mike Morgan to come forward to take the chair position, and we will be back.
So we have 4 cards to speak on the Rossmoyne Historic District.
Before we do that, we'll just have a staff presentation to tell you the
okay.
results of the petition. Just to bring us back into this has been a long process for Rossmoyne, and they've done an amazing job organizing their community to really get interested in the historic district, and worked with a lot of people to get to the point tonight where they are bringing a petition containing the signatures of a lot of people from the neighborhood who are interested in having this become a historic district. So I threw this in just because tonight's your final decision as a body for this process. If you approve this tonight, this will then move forward to the Planning Commission. We've already established or set up a hearing for June 6th at 5 o'clock, which is a Wednesday evening at the Planning Commission. Even if you don't approve this, it still goes to planning. These are advisory votes that then go to City Council. Once we get the Planning Commission's input, we'll set up a City Council hearing, and we'll send out another mailing to the community so that everyone knows what date and time the council hearing will be held, and that will be where the final decision about whether Rossmoyne becomes a district or not is made. Just to remind everyone of the boundary, I know there have been a lot of questions coming from people who may live outside the boundary. Why did you choose this boundary? And this is just a reminder that the Rossmoyne boundary is a very distinct boundary representing the early tract development by the Haddock-Nibley Company. This is in contrast to Ardeven Highlands and North Cumberland Heights, where we had a kind of a more piecemeal development pattern. This neighborhood was developed as a whole and still reflects that aspect. To remind the Commission, there are several things that we need to do or that need to happen in order for a district to pass the requirements of the ordinance. One of those is that it has to meet at least one of the 9 designation criteria for historic districts. Our consultant on this project, LSA Associates, was able to make a determination that this district, or this proposed district, meets 6 of those criteria. So well in excess of the required 1 criterion. The consultants also determined that the period of significance for Rossmoyne runs between 1923 and 1950. That means those are the years during which it began as a residential subdivision and was more or less built out by 1950. One of the key aspects of the Historic Resource Survey is to figure out how many contributing properties there are versus non-contributing. And Rossmoyne, which has 503 individual built parcels, as well as Nibley Park, which isn't counted in this count of contributors, was determined to have 413 out of those 503 as contributors, which is 82%, which is kind of a phenomenal rate for a district this big. So that's a very good, solid percentage. Our ordinance requires that 60% be contributors, so obviously we're well above that. And then finally, once the Commission at its October 24th hearing approved the Historic Resource Survey that LSA did, and I should mention that was done with a grant that we received from the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and it's a grant that will never be given again because the whole funding source closed down and they shut their Western Regional Office. So we were very lucky to get in while this was still available and help offset the city's costs for funding the survey. Once the Commission authorized that the survey was okay, it also said that the proponents could go into the community and distribute petitions. And those are the petitions where we're asking individual property owners whether or not they want City Council to designate a historic district. And it's a very specific process because all of the owners of each property within the district need to sign this. So if you have a situation where one person in a household wants the district and one doesn't, that vote doesn't count. So the proponents returned the petition on April 23rd, which was within the required 6 months, and the owners of 359 properties had signed the petition, meaning that 71% of the properties in the district had signed. And that's also a very good number, certainly well above the 50% that's required by the ordinance. And I should also note that we did not receive any petition opposing the district. So there may be people within the district who don't support designation as a district, but we haven't had any formal opposition the way our ordinance allows. So, with that note, we can say that in terms of the ordinance, all of the hurdles have been passed, and it's now the Commission's decision whether or not to vote to recommend that City Council designate the historic district.
We go to we now have for oral communications, Stephanie Kindleberger.
Good evening. My name is Stephanie Kindleberger. I was a block captain going door to door in Rossmoyne neighborhood. I met some great neighbors and received a lot of support for a historic district. I don't live in Rossmoyne, but in Billhurst Park, several blocks away. I volunteered to participate in gathering signatures because I believe the Rossmoyne neighborhood is so very special, unique, and quite beautiful. It should be preserved. I urge you to vote in favor of the Rossmoyne neighborhood becoming historic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now have Greg Grammer.
Yes, my name is Greg Grammer. I'm the president of the Glendale Historical Society. And first off, I'd like to congratulate and commend the applicants and the Rossmoyne neighborhood for this this really amazing feat in carrying it through the process, getting to this point, and really garnering so much support in the community. So with that, on behalf of the Board of Directors, I would like to strongly encourage this body to recommend approval of the establishment of the Rossmoyne Historic District. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Sean Purcell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. Good evening. My name is Sean Purcell, and I'm speaking in support of the designation of the Historic District. Normally, I address you as a representative of the Glendale Historical Society. Tonight, however, I'm speaking as a resident of the greater Rossmoyne neighborhood. As I mentioned, I am with the Historical Society, and so I do want to associate myself with the comments of Mr. Grammer and the support of the Historical Society for the designation. I do not live in the proposed historic district, but I do live in the greater Rossmoyne neighborhood. My house is on the western edge of the neighborhood on North Maryland between Stocker and Randolph. We refer to this area as Casa Verdugo because the 1907 Casa Verdugo restaurant is in the area at the corner of Louise and Randolph. And you might wonder why I would take the time to come down here and speak in support of the creation of the Rossmoyne Historic District when it apparently doesn't impact me. Well, the answer is that the proposed historic district is part of the greater Rossmoyne neighborhood in which I live. And while the Rossmoyne name originally referred to the tract, which is now the subject of the historic district. If you ask anybody, well, where's Rossmoyne today, they'll tell you essentially from Glendale Avenue to Brand, north of the Verdugo Wash, into the hills above Mountain, and over up to about Royal. And there are several distinct tracts within that area, and the lines are not clear unless you really look closely. So the whole neighborhood appears to be cohesive. Additionally, the proposed historic district is a gateway into the Rossmoyne neighborhood. When you enter the neighborhood from Glendale Avenue at Glen Oaks, you pass through the historic district. So because the proposed historic district is part of the greater neighborhood and the residents of other tracts within the neighborhood pass through the historic district on the way to our houses, maintaining the charming character of the neighborhood within the proposed historic district benefits not only the residents of the historic district, but all the residents of the surrounding neighborhood. So therefore, it's been said that when you buy your house, you buy the neighborhood. When my wife and I moved to Glendale and discovered the greater Rossmoyne neighborhood, we decided that this is the place we wanted to live. And we made a conscious decision to buy the neighborhood in Rossmoyne, and we're happy that we did. And we hope that you will protect our neighborhood investment by supporting the creation of the Rossmoyne Historic District. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we have Harry Zavos.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I appear here as the chair of the Historical Preservation Committee of the Rossmoyne Mountain Homeowners Association. When the historical survey was being conducted, I and another board member ran into the young woman who was conducting it, and she volunteered that she found our neighborhood to be one of the most rich architecturally and intact neighborhoods of its kind that she had ever surveyed. And I think if you throw back your memory to the last time she appeared before you, you'll remember that she made enthusiastically, equally glowing comments. And it was the desire to allow for change, but to preserve the feel and character of that area that caused a number of people to engage in an over 2-year prodigious effort to bring it to this point. And as a block captain who surveyed a lot of homes, I can tell you that is the case. Sometimes you go out for 2 or 3 hours and maybe you get 2 people at home. That is the 2 owners and nobody else, and you have to keep going back and back and back, and sometimes you get 1 owner and then you have to come back and get the other owner. You go to homes and you know somebody's home, but they don't answer the door, and you keep going back. You go back several times, and when you finally get the owner there, it turns out that they're renters and they can't sign the petition. But nevertheless, the volunteers, and they were wonderful volunteers, and many of them outside, part of the association, but outside the boundaries of the proposed district. At the time?
Yeah, you can finish up.
Okay, did a considerable amount of effort, and here we are. And you're at the next step to move this process along to protect and preserve what I think is a valuable and aesthetically valuable and historically important asset of the city.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else?
Excuse me?
No cards?
No, we went through all 4. That's it. We're done with the
Yeah,
cards.
close the public hearing.
The public hearing is closed.
Oh,
Should we-
commenting?
Yeah.
Okay. I have nothing else to say other than congratulations. It's so nice to see such an enthusiastic and obviously energetic group of people here tonight. I think you embody what the definition of neighborhood and neighborliness is in any city, but in Glendale it's particularly important that we continue with the process of getting designated neighborhoods such as yours, which really shine in integrity and physical beauty and aesthetics, and also harken back to an era when architectural craftsmanship really was at its peak in America, and there are so many beautiful homes. What the lady from LSA said, I remember that. In fact, I was planning to mention that because I thought it was startling that someone who'd seen so much in her work as an architectural historian had thought to comment like that on a neighborhood. But clearly this is a landmark day because I'm certainly in favor and enthusiastically support your submission, and it certainly meets all the criteria. But, you know, this many houses in a historic district of this much integrity is really a significant moment in Glendale's history. So not only do you have a historic neighborhood, but you yourselves are making history. So congratulations, and for all your wonderful work. On behalf of all of us, you know, you make the whole city proud with what you've done.
Commissioner?
Absolutely. I would have to agree with Commissioner Vidor. I would also like to congratulate you and commend you, commend everyone who worked on this survey. It is definitely a very lengthy and labor-intensive work, and I know that your hearts were in it. Considering the hard work, the determination, the evaluations that we have reviewed, the number of contributing properties, that the district could be eligible under 6 different criteria, and also having 359 properties who want to be designated. That's 71%, which is 21% over what is required. I am definitely in favor, and I support you, and I congratulate you.
I have to concur with my other commissioners. Rossmoyne is a unique place, and I recommend anyone, if you have the ability, to go on the Los Angeles Public Library. They have a photo site where you can look at historic photos of Glendale along with the Glendale Special Collections, but you can actually see them. And you can see the way Rossmoyne has developed, and it's unique. I grew up in the area, and it's lovely just to walk down Ethel and the other streets over by, I mean, to know that Nibley Park was actually put there by the developers was unique in the area. It was just something that just wasn't done at the time. And as mentioned by Commissioner Tufenkian, so many things have fallen together, and you guys have worked so hard, and it's just honorable. I mean, it's one of the nicest things for Glendale, this large a HBC zone, and I highly recommend it. So,
Vote?
yes, well,
Motion.
I can't.
Can I see the motion, and I will make the motion? It's the motion? No. Well, I'll try it. I don't have a copy of a proposed motion in front of me, but I would
It's
like...
basically, you know.
I would like to move that the Historic Preservation Commission recommend to City Council that a historic district overlay zone be established in Rossmoyne.
I second.
Wait. The vote?
Roll call.
So
anxious.
Commissioner Tufenkian,
Yes.
Commissioner Vidor,
Yes.
and Commissioner Morgan.
Enthusiastically, yes.
Congratulations.
We need a sign.
2 more meetings to go.
So,
Yeah, so now, I don't know if they were watching this. Are they? Okay. Come back.
Without having
I
a
think
glass of champagne.
Alan said they were watching. Here they are.
thank you.
Did you take my agenda, Mike? Well, thank you, everybody. And I'd like to just say one quick word. I'd like to offer special thanks to resident Lorna Vartanian for spearheading this amazing effort for Rossmoyne.
Thank you so much. This is really a special day, and clearly it takes a village, as they say. It couldn't have been done without the numerous neighbors and residents who helped out, and it's been really a fabulous process. We just have a fabulous community, and I think an effort like this really builds community and really brings people together. So it's been an absolute pleasure, and I thank everybody who supported this process. Thank you.
Thank you.
And just to fill in a bit about the process, you know, the number of signatures that we have today isn't the final number necessarily. This number can increase all the way up till the city council hearing. Going through the petitions, we had to disqualify 3 properties that had either partially signed or signed with somewhat, not, I don't want to say questionable, but we just couldn't determine that 2 individual people had signed. So we didn't include those in the tally. So the proponents can still move forward looking for those signatures and possibly other people who they weren't able to reach. So this number could change before we get to city council.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And congratulations. Next on the agenda is new business. Do we have any, Jay?
We do not.
Unlisted, okay. And then item 8A, review of State Office of Historic Preservation Technical Assistance, Series Number 14, which is writing effective historic preservation ordinances.
And because it's Preservation Month, Happy Preservation Month,
Yes.
we wanted to not lose focus on the idea that we're proposing some relatively modest changes to the Historic Preservation Ordinance, but we don't have anything, any text ready for the Commission to review at this time. In terms of the process, we want to make sure that you're very familiar with the aspects of what go into a good ordinance. We have a good ordinance right now. There are several things we can do to make it a little better and more in keeping with state standards that are brought to us through the State Historic Preservation Office. So they produced a document a number of years ago about writing effective ordinances, and we're using that as kind of a guideline in terms of thinking about our ordinance, seeing what's good in it, seeing what else we might add to kind of enhance it. So I wanted to just run this by all of you. You've had a chance, hopefully, to look over the document. You probably noticed that it was broken into kind of sections. So I just wanted to go through those and then just kind of give you a rough idea of where we're taking things at staff level, and then get any feedback that the Commission has in terms of things that you read or things you're thinking about as we go through the presentation. So of the 9, the first, and I didn't number these because it gets kind of confusing. People start thinking, oh, because they number these and put these in this order, an ordinance has to be in that order, and that's not the case. Cities tailor their ordinances to their specific needs, so there's no one-size-fits-all, this is how you do an ordinance, and that's why we're kind of doing this exercise to see what works in Glendale. The purpose section is basically that. It explains why do we have historic preservation? Why is it important in the community? The second section discusses the enabling authority. How does the city have the ability to designate a property and then to tell an owner how they may or may not be able to use that property to some degree? Ordinances often discuss how the Preservation Commission is established. They certainly lay out the procedures and criteria for designating historic resources, and then once those resources are designated, they also lay out procedures and criteria for how they're reviewed when owners come to the city and say, I want to make some changes to this designated property. There's a section talking about the consideration of the economic effects of an ordinance, both in terms of economic incentives that the city can have, and also how the city deals with economic hardships on the part of owners of historic resources. There's a section about appeals, how decisions can be appealed. And then there's a section about enforcement. If someone does not do things that are in accordance with the ordinance, what can the city do if that happens? And then finally, there's a discussion of definitions and severability. So what I wanted to do is just break each of those down. And I'm not sure, Commissioner Shire, if you want to see if there are questions for each section or if you want to wait till the end. I'm not sure how many questions there'll be, so we'll
let's
play
let's take it by ear.
Play it by ear?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So in terms of the purpose section, ordinances generally lead off with this, and ours currently does, and we're going to leave this as our kind of lead-off section. And we're not making any major changes here. There's some tweaks and changes to some of the wording to change some of the emphasis. And then two things that we definitely need to do are reference how the ordinance relates to the general plan and to our community plan for North Glendale and the future community plans we'll develop for the rest of the city. And then we also need to add a reference to our certified local government status and how this ordinance helps maintain that status, and then also how it works under CEQA when the city does environmental review and we look at cultural resources. So, no questions there? In terms of enabling authority, this is something we don't have in the ordinance right now, and we're not sure that we actually need to have it. There is a provision of the state government code that gives cities the right to designate properties and to treat them differently when they're considered historic resources. And we'll discuss that with the city attorney to see if there's any need to have that in here or not. The establishment of the Preservation Commission will not be in this ordinance. I should have started this. So the Historic Preservation Ordinance is Title 15.20 of the Municipal Code, and the establishment of all of the city's boards and commissions is handled in Title II, so we don't need to change anything on that. This is the section that when we've discussed this before, and I think as commissioners you've all kind of sense that there's an issue with our 7 designation criteria, and there's some frustration on staff's part and probably on your part that some of these may not be necessary. So the proposal is to reduce those 7 to 4. That will be completely in keeping with national and state standards for designation, and this is the direction that most cities are moving in and that the state suggests that we move in. We are considering the introduction of an incentive criterion, which we discussed, where historic resources might be, that may or may not by themselves be designatable. We may be able to develop status codes and a criterion to allow those to be listed so that they would be eligible for the Mills Act if they met certain standards. And this would be primarily for development sites where property was preserved as part of a larger development. And we're not sure at this point if this incentive criterion is going to work or not, but it's kind of a goal that we have that we're going to pursue with the state. And then a small matter of adjusting the posting requirements to match the posting requirements for other titles. Specifically, we now have a 300-foot radius that we post for Glendale Register nominations. We'll match the other boards and commissions and ordinances to 500 feet. So, yeah, we're good there.
I have a quick question, actually.
I have one too.
Does the Mills Act contract and the changes we've made this past year, does that get incorporated into this, or is that separate?
Yeah, the Mills Act is separate. We could bring that discussion to council, probably as a separate item when we go to council with this. But it's not included in there.
Okay.
The ordinance just establishes that the Mills Act is an incentive that's available. So,
Go ahead.
Could you just quickly restate what the 3 criteria are that we're considering deleting? I know one of them was the last remaining, but
well, that one will stay in part. It's the first criterion reflecting the heritage of the city will get subsumed into both the events criterion and the people criterion, because events may have been significant under both of those. We're going to remove the established visual feature of a neighborhood and remove the criterion about preserving the natural kind of the natural landscape, which hasn't really applied to any of the designations we've had so far. And if there was significant landscape aspects to a site, those could be brought in under one of the other criteria. Your question about last remaining type, what we would do is get rid of the 2-part architecture criterion that we have now, which is that a property either has significant or exemplary or outstanding workmanship, materials, details, design, or is one of the best examples in its neighborhood. And we'll just use the standard language, which is more favoring the first and isn't going to make reference to neighborhood.
Yeah,
and it will be the commission's decision ultimately to possibly look beyond our kind of artificial neighborhood boundaries in the absence of a citywide survey. If and when we have a citywide survey, then we'll have a better sense of what may or may not kind of meet this criterion. Okay, so then also one of the big gaps that's kind of surprising to me is when we talk about how does the commission review properties when owners come in and say, okay, we're designated, we want to put an addition on the back of the house. What are the guidelines? What are we trying to do? All good preservation ordinances reference the Secretary of the Interior's standards for rehabilitation, which is the national kind of set of 10 guiding principles. And they're basically very broad, so there's a lot of interpretation that the commission will be able to take advantage of in determining what's appropriate. But it's really also kind of the cutoff point between what staff can approve and cannot approve. So it's really important that we reference them, include them in the definitions so that everyone understands what we're basing this on. When staff has the ability to make a determination if something meets the Secretary of the Interior standards, that we could write a staff-level permit. We also reserve the right, depending on the situation, to say while we can do this, we think it's important that the Preservation Commission look at this. And so we can always move something up to the commission. And then there are certain things that come to us that may not meet the standards, but the owner is, insistent or feels it's very important. And you have the ability as a commission to kind of sidestep the standards to some degree in a case-by-case basis if you think something is actually appropriate, even if it doesn't quite meet the standards. So And then the other thing we're going to do in this section is provide really clear explanations of what is a major alteration, what is a minor alteration, and what is routine maintenance. Right now, that's not really that well established, and we think just for the sake of people with designated properties who want to understand what they can and can't do with or without going to the commission, and for the commission, it's important to have those definitions be really clear. Any thoughts on those?
Continue.
Okay. The section about economic effects and the consideration as they relate to historic resources. One small thing is that when we were looking this over with kind of our zoning expert, it was unclear. We have an incentive that allows certain uses in designated properties that might not otherwise be allowed in that zone. And we just want to make sure that all of that list of zones is completely comprehensive and takes into account some of the newer zones that we've had since the ordinance was written. And then we also want to consider some alternatives regarding the economic hardship provision. And this is something that good ordinances have. It rarely ever comes up, and we don't see it coming up a lot in Glendale. But we want to make sure that it's in our ordinance. But at this point, we haven't kind of hashed out, what of the various alternatives we're going to look at. So, appeals. The city has kind of a standard appeal process that applies to all decisions by all boards and commissions. So we don't have to have something specific in our ordinance about that. That's taken care of in the code, the municipal code. Enforcement. At this time, looking at the enforcement section, which allows for civil and criminal penalties. It allows for the what's called a scorched earth provision, where a permit can't be issued for 3 years if a designated structure were demolished illegally. We think that that's a pretty solid section right now. And then finally, the definitions and severability. And the definition section right now is pretty weak. And like with things with major alterations, minor alterations, defining exactly what is a historic resource. It's not exactly clear that a historic resource, is it a designated historic resource, or it is a property that's been determined to be of historic interest but is not yet designated? Has it been identified in a survey? So we're going to kind of break it down so that all of those kind of meanings are clear as far as the ordinance goes, and then make sure the ordinance consistently applies each of those definitions. And then severability is kind of a legal technicality that's part of contracts and ordinances. It's already in the Glendale Municipal Code, so we don't need to worry about that. But what it means is if a section of our ordinance was ever struck down by a court, the rest of the ordinance would stand. It wouldn't automatically invalidate the rest. So those are the 9 sections that we're looking at, and the kind of basic things that we're considering. Our goal right now, and this could shift because there are a lot of people looking at this, but we'd like to bring you a strikeout draft of the ordinance by next month's hearing. And if we can get any feedback, whether it's tonight or if individually you want to talk to me about any thoughts that you have, we'll definitely take that into consideration.
Are there any comments or questions? Go ahead.
On, I think, the third item, we talked about incentives, and I think you were referring to the application of the Mills Act in certain situations where the property isn't designated.
Right, or the property may not meet our criteria as they stand, but because it's a property of definitely of historic interest, with historic integrity and character, if a development allows that property to be saved and retained as part of the overall development site, possibly we could extend the Mills Act to those properties, which would create an incentive to what would happen in many situations otherwise, where the property would just be demolished and we would lose it. And we're definitely refining that, and we're going to work closely with the state office on that, because this isn't kind of a standard, this is something that other cities haven't done. And there's a chance it's not going to work out under their standards of how they want to see the Mills Act applied, but we're going to give it a shot. So
I just wanted to make sure we weren't de-incentivizing people to list by offering them an incentive that, the easy way to an incentive, but the way you describe it, it's That is not the
Yeah,
case.
and then,
so.
and the incentive for properties that are eligible, the incentive would already be there.
Right.
So the owner still doesn't have to take us up on it, but it's there, if it makes sense. So.
And then I have a question. Does the ordinance, I don't remember, does it call out specifically that it's applicable to exteriors only in the ordinance?
That's not completely clear, and that's something I'm glad you
Okay.
mentioned that. In the definitions, we're going to define what is the exterior of a property, we're going to define what is a quasi-public space, and we're going
Okay.
to define what is a private interior.
Okay, so we're going to then call out the issue we discussed about that in certain situations, if appropriate, interiors, if they meet certain criteria, could be part of a designation voluntarily, not by mandate. That would come into the ordinance?
I'm not
I'm looking
sure
at-
how we would do that on a voluntary interior designation, so we'll
Then
look
under
into
certain
that. yeah.
circumstances.
No, I
there-
remember we've talked about that
Right,
before,
and
so...
it's, we have a policy on it, and it would be nice to be able to somehow elaborate on that a little bit in the ordinance, if it's legally possible.
Yeah, well, we'll check with the city attorney and also with the state office and see how that's been handled.
Thank you.
So following up on that, I don't think I was on the commission when this discussion came up before, but I do think the question was brought up about, for example, if a private structure had, for example, a large view into the home, say from the front, from a big picture window, could we have any jurisdiction over interior changes to those parts of the home that could be seen?
Yeah, generally, when we had this discussion before about designating interiors, we kind of polled other cities, both in the area, and then looked at national kind of other cities and how they deal with it. It's almost unheard of to do that, and it's unfortunate for some people, but interior is interior, and we can't hold someone who has a larger window to a different standard than someone with a smaller window. When I worked in New York, this was a big issue with certain commercial properties where you had big plate glass windows that people are walking past all day long, but those interiors couldn't be designated there. So
Okay,
I
sorry,
don't-
I misread. I thought I had read somewhere that...
Well, we tried for that one.
Discussed it, yeah.
And, I think it's interesting that in the SHPO document, I read their section on interiors, and it sounds like they did mention the validity of looking at interior residence features that are visible from the public right away, which is obviously very applicable to especially mid-century, modern, and beyond. But you had said that our legal department didn't go for it? Or?
Well, it was also based on our research, so I'm not
Oh.
sure, did they mention specific ordinances that allow for that?
I don't think they mentioned specific ordinances, but in their general discussion, which was lengthier than I thought it was going to be, when I read it in here, that they, I'd probably be hard-pressed to find it, but they do mention that as one of the things that might be considered.
Yeah, I don't know of
They
any
have no
cities that have
examples.
done it. So a lot of this is kind of based on legal precedent, like
Right.
what have other cities done that have gone unchallenged, or have they been challenged? I know Pasadena is able to regulate interiors only on their green and green properties. And so they have a special clause in their ordinance that separates out green and green specifically because of what happened with the Blacker house. But I'll put that on my list of things to look at when we talk to SHPO and then kind of take this to legal here.
If I may, for the commission, because Jay's been providing this discussion items table, and now I could go back and say that we discussed this topic in August, our meeting in August of last year. So if you want to go back and revisit the video where that conversation went.
Yeah, it's the last.
I just want to use this because
We've got to do that.
reference.
In light of Commissioner Vidor finding that in the SHPO bulletin, I think we'll just definitely check with SHPO to see, while they mention it, has it actually been invoked, and how so?
Great. Thank you for your comprehensive review. Yes.
Sorry, can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Regarding structures that are demolished illegally, what is our current procedure for that?
We can prevent a building permit for being issued for the same site for 3 years from the time of demolition, and that's called the scorched earth clause. And some say it's been invoked in Los Angeles on a few occasions, although they're not always willing to do it when they should. But we haven't had that situation come up, I believe, ever. But we have it built in as a 3-year delay for building permit issuance.
And could we possibly require that a structure that was illegally, demolished like that be rebuilt exactly as it was?
We shouldn't, but, because you can't step in the same river twice, you can't rebuild something that's gone. So we want to disincentivize illegal demolition as much as possible and punish people who do it as much as we can. But the idea, especially, we don't have drawings of most of our properties. We have, as you'll see in a few minutes, some of our photos are not the best quality photos we could have of all of our properties. So, and then just in preservation terms, reconstruction of missing resources is generally not looked on as good preservation.
And I asked that because I may be wrong, but I thought that was something that they do in Pasadena, but I haven't had a chance to really look into that.
I've never heard that. It would surprise me, but it's possible. So
Okay.
that could.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to item 8B, Discover Glendale's Hidden Gems, Historic Preservation Month Overview of Glendale Register Properties.
Okay, this is something we're doing just to kind of take advantage of Historic Preservation Month. It's something we've never done. We have 93 properties. We're not going to spend a lot of time looking at these, so it's going to be kind of a slideshow, but I'm happy to stop if anyone has any questions, and I may or may not be able to answer them. I'll have a little commentary on a few things. And then I wanted to just emphasize, these are our known gems. There's a lot out there that we don't know about. But that term was just what the National Trust is using for Historic Preservation Month across the country. And it worked out nicely since we're the Jewel City and they're talking about all of our gems. So I want to thank our... I have to change to... That's right. This file is so huge that we have to go to a new... I want to thank our preservation apprentice, Christina Park, who helped pull all of these images together and did the captioning. And then I also want to thank Mike Morgan, who helped us with printing and mounting of all of these photos for the display that's still up at the Central Library. So if anyone out there is going to the library and stops to look at the display case next to the circulation desk, it's kind of a fun display of everything that we've got right now on the register. We're pushing 100, and we'll see if maybe in the next year or so we can get up there. So we just are starting in order. The first 23, I think, I don't have the number in my head. Maybe I'll figure it out as we go along. Properties on the register were actually in the preservation element for many years before we had a Glendale register. And then when we established the preservation ordinance and the register, they kind of automatically became part of our register. What that means is that in some cases we don't have a lot of information about some of these houses. So Christina is also trying to beef up what we have for the ones that we don't. So that's kind of an ongoing project. But we should get, she's already found some cool stuff in the last few days, so we'll get more. So anyways, without further ado, here's number 1, the Verdugo adobe. Very appropriate to start with some of our earliest and kind of most important buildings, and then we already go into a sad one where the Oak of Peace is no longer with us. The Casa Adobe de San Rafael, where the sheriff of LA County retired and lived in the Glendale area. Another 19th century building. So our first few things obviously were all things related to the early heritage of Glendale, the 19th century. The Taylor House, and then the Richardson House, which is very much intact when you see it today. It's a real surprising sight on the street. You can see a little bit of the apartment building next to it, and it was moved to this site a number of years ago. Obviously, for the Historical Society, the Doctor's House is the most important building in the city, and it's one of our beautiful examples of Victorian architecture. Obviously, El Miradero, undeniable as a critical site and going through a great restoration and rehab that is going to really make it a very special place when they're done, and we're hoping to see really good results there. The Good House, not far from us, another one of our only examples of Victorian architecture. A picture that blocks the lovely Toll House with its lovely tree, so we have to remember to take pictures in the winter. The railroad depot, obviously, Le Mesnager barn. And I think one of the things that's cool when we look at these is just the diversity of resources. We're a big city, but we're not a huge city, and we have a lot of different types of resources designated at this point. We have Miss American Green Cross in Brand Park, which was an early environmental movement, helped save our trees. Grand Army of the Republic building on Glendale Avenue, which, even though it's been altered a bit, looks a lot like it does here. The YMCA building on Louise. Masonic Temple, another site that's going to go through a very exciting kind of rehabilitation to bring it back to life. It's been vacant for a long time on the upper floors, and it'll be nice to see people using this building again. Security Trust building, which is getting a new tenant on the ground floor. It's going to become part of the street life of downtown Glendale again very soon. The Hotel Glendale, just across the street from where we're sitting. The Harrower Lab, where there was cool early kind of crackpot research into endocrinology, so it's got a great story going there. Grand Central Air Terminal, and again, we have three of our major resources in Glendale are soon going to be entering into major rehabilitations, and this one's very exciting. It's owned by the Walt Disney Company, and they're going to be renovating the entire building. Obviously, the Alex Theater, and if you haven't been there lately, this photo reflects the new paint job of the old part, the stenciling that was redone, and a lot of the bronze work across the top of the building here was recast or remade to reflect the original condition. So there's been some great stuff going on at the Alex. Everyone who drives on Kenneth Road knows the Jones House, which I won't call Terra. Oops. And then we have some of our cool early modern resources. And this is one of the great things about Glendale, that some of the early modern architects were coming here. And we have a bunch of undesignated early modern resources that we would love to see come onto the Glendale Register if their owners are interested. Here's the Derby House by Lloyd Wright. Here's the Calori House, also by Lloyd Wright. And then here's the Rodriguez House, and if people are in the Woodlands, the new owners of this house are doing some work on it that's actually, even though it's lovely in this photo, is going to bring it back closer to its original appearance. So it's nice to know our register properties are in good hands. Here's Homeland, the home of where the BB King, the man who invented the air rifle, retired. That's in the Rossmoyne neighborhood. Here's the Brockman Clock Tower, which was designated just as the clock tower, but the Brockman House is certainly an eligible property for designation. If the owners are interested in that, we can bring that to the commission someday, hopefully. Here's Lorelei. And here's the Walters House, which we just learned has passages and hallways that are very dungeon-like, and a man who made really, really, really schlocky horror movies lived here for a number of years with his harem. So we'll be bringing this information into the record as Christina continues her research. Here's the very interesting Blumenthal House on Glen Oaks, which some people have attributed to Lloyd Wright. We don't have any information, and even stylistically, I'm not sure that makes sense, but whoever designed this house was working with an interesting conception. The Municipal Power and Light Building, just next to where we're sitting, next to the parking garage. Nice example of municipal Art Deco. And, of course, City Hall is on our register. And the U.S. Post Office, what I love about this picture, when you look at the cars and you look at the post office today, it's like completely unchanged. It's really remarkable. The Gregorians' residence, which is still a bit of a mystery, and this is the only photo we have of it, so hopefully Christina will track something down here. And then we have our series of bridges that were designated. Several of them, such as this one, are Virendeel truss bridges, which is a unique kind of engineering solution and evidently very rare. So we have probably the best collection of Virendeel trusses. Here's another one and another. All of these are spanning the Verdugo Wash. And then we have I can't remember the name of this truss, but a different kind of truss bridge. We have the Woolworth Building at Brand and Wilson, the former Woolworth Building. Then we have a few apartment buildings that are designated just to change a pace from the single-family residences that we see most often. So here's Edmondstone. Here's the great craftsman, the Elliott House in the Casa Verdugo neighborhood. Here's the Verschellini house, and I don't know from this photo what's going on up here. So this is an old photo, though, so nothing to worry about. Whatever happened, happened.
It's like it's sprouting. I know.
Here's one of the most picturesque properties in Glendale, I think, the Crowell House on Glen Oaks. Here's the home of Bob's Big Boy, Bob Wyan. Here's another apartment building, the Glenarden. And here's one of the jewels of the Jewel City is the Art Even home of the Campbell family, who helped develop Glendale with Leslie Brand. And this is one of our newer landmarks, even though it looks ancient. It's from 1974, and it was part of an exchange with Japan to create this tea house in Brand Park. Here's the Anderson House, which requires a better picture at some point. And this apartment building has a lot of kind of interesting exotic influences around the doorway, the Louise Dryden Apartments. This is the Cannon House, and we'll start seeing our series of great Spanish colonial revival houses as we go through this. The Peterson House. Here's another Craftsman, the Hewitt Baker. The Baird House. 1114 Rossmoyne, a nice Tudor Revival house. Again, this tree is blocking too much of it. The Worley House in Art Even Highlands. The Klein House, which is very visible also on Kenneth Road. The Sahakian House, an interesting kind of late colonial revival interpretation of kind of a medieval style of architecture. The Lynch House on Rossmoyne. The Ford House, a Monterey Revival with colonial revival influences. The Ben Lomond House, this is a real grand property sitting up above the street level like that. This is my favorite name of all of our houses, the Funk House. The Funk House of Glendale. And the Kent Lombardi House on Cumberland. The Bonetto House, one of our few designated properties in North Glendale. And this family, Mike Morgan can tell us more about it, but they were important in the commercial history of North Glendale. And the house was designated a few years ago. This is our first mid-century modern designation, first post-war, I guess, the Daly House by local architect Claire Earle. This is 922 Cumberland, also in North Cumberland Highlands Proposed District. Everybody knows the Seeley's building. This is the before condition, and this is looking pretty sharp after the recent rehab. And I think they're ready to start renting out their spaces. So it's a commercial rental. The Brower House, home to the Reverend Brower of First Baptist Church, who was the longest served pastor in Baptist church history at the time he died. It's like there for 72 years or something. 1661 Valley View Road. Both of this house and the previous one are in the proposed Brockmont Park Historic District. Everyone knows the Lewis House, home to Ed Strangler Lewis. This house on Edmonton Road in Chevy Chase. The Wellman House, he was one of the important people who helped Glendale Federal rise to a level of prominence and really made it an institution for Glendale and also the region. This is the Castle House on Mountain Street, one of our only French Norman kind of style houses like that. Really nice example of colonial revival on Kenneth Road called Cedar Knoll. 955 Rosemount, designed by Milton J. Black, who's best known for his streamlined modern work, but was very versatile. Did the Spanish house. 1117 Rossmoyne. The owners of this house were able to give us a photo of it when it was constructed, when there was no landscaping. And this is another example of a property that's very intact from its original condition. The McCall's house. Oh, should I say something about this one? a really nice French revival, French-inspired revival that was brought some fame to Glendale as one of the winner of the McCall's House of the Month, and was actually built here. And the fascinating thing about this house is that it was designed by the man who designed this building we sit in. So that is versatility. Mm-hmm. A house that I had trouble defining by architectural style when it came through, so I just threw a bunch of things at it and they stuck, and so now we have a complicated list there. It's a nice Tudor Revival. This was designed by Alfred Priest, who's probably our most important early architect. in Glendale. Another nice Tudor Revival. We have a bunch of nice Tudor Revivals in Rossmoyne. And here's the wonderful Block House, still occupied by its original owner, Richard Block. And man and the house suit each other to a T. It's a great combination. This fascinating Tudor Revival with this just this over-the-top roof and kind of the little cutout, which is where you get your Tudor Revival stuff, so different balance than we usually see with this style. And here's another house. Do I have to say anything about this house? 1220 Cortez, a beautiful house in Rossmoyne. And 1640 Art Even, one of our brick properties. We don't have a lot of homes that are completely clad with brick. That was part of what helped the commission decide to designate this house. This house is almost unphotographable from the street, but it's a really nice mid-century modern by Richard Fleming. Thank you. Yeah. There are a lot of connections here today. So here's 1441 Royal Boulevard in the Royal Boulevard Historic District, where one of our commissioners grew up. And here's our most recent, in terms of vintage properties, the Rice House, designed by Gerald Lomax, who was an associate of Craig Elwood. And this is a really fascinating property. And I wasn't sure when this went to City Council what they were going to think about this, and it went through on a unanimous vote. So it's a very beautiful place, very different. 1446 Royal Boulevard is also designed by Merrill Baird. So this building, the French Revival on Royal Boulevard, and this Colonial Revival, all by the same architect. Here's Casa de Carmen, also known as the home of the, oh my God, I'm blocking. Jensen, yes, the Jensen House of Jensen's Arcade and Egyptian Cafe fame. Here's another Richard Fleming, this one with this kind of beautiful clear story kind of hovering above the main spine of the house. Sorry about this photo, but this is a really unique building, one of two of the kind of concrete storage buildings we have in Glendale that was designated last year. The gray Sherwood House, which has the fascinating approach and the opium den inside and the porthole windows and the kind of lighthouse chimney. The opium den is not a real opium den, just a picturesque space. The Stanford House on 804 Kenneth, one of our houses that has a face. And the Wall House, a recent designation. It's a ranch-style house, but it has these great kind of modern features and then this kind of Asian influence. So it combines a few aspects of different styles. And this is a house that has a very well-preserved interior, and the owners are great stewards of this building. But a lot of that doesn't show from the street, obviously. And then finally, our most recent designation, the home of Bert Farrar, who was the developer of Chevy Chase Estates. And this is a hidden gem, literally, because when you see it from the street, you don't think it's much more than a nice little one-story Spanish house, but it turns out to be one of the most grand houses that I think any of us has seen in Glendale. So that is it, 1 through 93 in record-setting time, I hope. And we're going to keep going. We won't do this very often, but every so often.
Thank you so much for putting that together and your staff.
Sure.
Is that something we could have on the website, a link to that?
That's a goal. I've wanted to have kind of a rotation of properties, and I know we have the technology, but we don't have the technology. So the website's going through a kind of an update citywide. So once that happens, we're going to try to get kind of a slideshow, this kind of stuff going.
That would be so helpful, I think, for the city to see. And excellent. Thank you.
Okay.
So any other discussion?
I forgot to agendize the commission discussion sheet. I don't know that we can agendize it now, but if anyone had any comments that they wanted to consider for next month, we could consider them, or just take what we have and move forward.
Yeah, the proposed topics for next month. Yeah, I think that's fine.
Yeah, I don't have any. We had.
Okay. Well, then I move to adjourn the meeting.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think we can't move that forward, but we could take any other ideas just as part of general discussion. But if there isn't anything, we'll make sure that's on the agenda for next month. And
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thing today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
okay, happy
Memorial
Preservation
Day.
Month. It's not over yet.
Yes.
So,
Meeting
go to
adjourned.
the library. Right?